Dr. Petrie, I appreciate you asking me to come up here and do this, and I've got to tell you something. You're the first guy that's ever gotten me to talk about this in public. He's a persuasive fellow, as you know. And another real impetus for me coming up today was I do really appreciate you all and respect what you're doing. This is great. But I haven't seen Bob, and I don't know when, or where's my other little friend? Oh, there he is, over there. These are two great guys that we spent a lot of time together many years ago. And they're not only fine physicians, they're great people. And on that particular day, I was a fourth-year resident at that point, and I was on the thoracic surgery service. And in those days, I really tried to look like a downside. I remember that my godfather in surgery was Dr. Robert Shaw. He was the first thoracic surgeon in the Southwest, this part of the world. And I'd known him all the time. I was in medical school residency, and I was on his service at the time, and I had a tie on, believe it or not. And we'd been over to the old Shasta Hospital for thoracic rounds, and I was eating some lunch, if you will call it, whatever, in the Parkland dining room or whatever it was. Half as big as this, about half as big as this thing. There's a lot of people in it. And I heard Dr. Shire's paid staff. Now, I wasn't on his service, and we didn't have beepers. Everything was overhead page in those days. And Dr. Shire's staff, well, that was a peculiar thing to hear. And so I walked over and I didn't have any business doing it. I just walked over to the phone, and somehow I knew he was out of town. And Ron Jones, that he just mentioned, got there a few minutes before, and not minutes, just seconds, and he answered the phone and turned around, and Ron tends to look pretty serious a lot of the time. And he said, "Come on." I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Emergency room." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Don't look excited." I rarely get very excited about much of anything, which is aggravating to some people. And I said, "Ron, what the hell's wrong with you?" And he said, "Well, the president's been shot." Now, this to show you how country I am. I thought, golly, I've never met one of those. I'm looking at it, I'm going to get to meet the president. And he went out the back door, and I stopped to call Dr. Shaw's office. And, of course, nobody was there, right in the middle of lunch. I went on down. There are three ways to go in the emergency room. This way took you through the X-ray waiting area. I noticed there were a lot of people there. I thought that was unusual. Walked in the emergency room. I'd never seen it empty. I mean, it was vacated. And then when I turned the corner there to go back to the trauma area, I saw all these people. And then I saw Miss Kennedy sitting beside the door. And I lost all my enthusiasm about what was going on because her clothing was stained badly. And just, routinely, I walked in the room, put on a pair of gloves, walked in behind him, just walked around the head, and Bob and Charlie and Malcolm were working with this wound in his throat, and I saw this big wound in this, parietal occipital area back here. And I was looking at his brain, and I don't know what I said. You don't remember what I said, do you? But I do know it probably wasn't anything brilliant. But one of those three guys said, "Well, there's a guy across the hall needs some help." I thought, well, I've got as good a chance to do something good over there as I do here, so I went over there. And it's really funny how these things, events like this, will affect you. When I walked in that room, and just a few steps, and I walked by all these people, and the only thing I can remember, and these images in your brain, is this lady with an orange dress on. Well, it turned out that was Miss Conlon. Of course, she's a big University of Texas fan, a graduate, and lest you not understand, I'm an Aggie. And, and then some people just never get it straight, but they still think that university, I work for the University of Texas, I'm a missionary down there trying to help them put it down. If we come back to something, I'll tell you a funny story about that. Anyway, I walked over there and I walked in this room that I've been in 1,000 times, and it seemed about half as big as this room in my mind. And there was a guy laying there on the table with a suit on, and an intern, and I think he was planning to go into urology, but he was just standing there like a statue. And his face was about the same color as his white coat. And nowadays, people cut, when they get to our emergency room anyway, they just get 2 pairs of scissors and start cutting. Well, we're all depression babies, and we don't throw away nothing. I say chewing gum, paper clips, rubber band, anything you might need them. I don't know to this day how I got his clothes off of him, but he was, just laying there. And I've often wondered how he did that. But anyway, I guess he had a big sucking chest wound. Big, long, and flopping in and out. And so I stopped it up and put a chest tube in him. Just like you do when you have a gunshot wound. And we didn't know how to do simple lines in those days, so I did a stapler's vein cut down on his right ankle, started tetracycline, and he had thrombophlebitis about that night. And, which is true. Tetracycline does that to your vein. We didn't have any of the antibiotics we got now. Put a 4 in, an NG tube in. By that time I realized who it was, and I wasn't all that crazy about operating on it by myself. And Buddy Giesecke, who was a good buddy of mine, I wish I could have known Dr. Giesecke. He later was chairman of anesthesia here, but he came down there, and I remember him saying, well, I'm going to give you some of this green gas. In the old days, I don't know what it is now, but oxygen came in green drums, and that's why they called it that. And I learned a lot. Every day I learned something, probably forget too, but I learned from Dr. Shaw, who spent a lot of time in England during World War II, that tail gunners in B-17 bombers that got shot in the chest, they could, because it hurt if they were staying away, they'd hold it because it hurt. But they stopped up the wound. But when to get them out, they had that little tunnel to go through. And by the time they got them out, if they didn't some way occlude this thing, they'd be dead. Well, I noticed when I put that chest tube in, the governor, I didn't deaden it, I just put it in, and he grunted a little bit, but that was all. He was essentially unconscious. Then he flipped his T-waves over for a little while. And finally, Dr. Shaw got there, and the thoracic resident on his service, because it got his Ebola, and 3 of us took him upstairs. And we started on his chest, of course, and it just blew. And it just blew apart that probably the middle lobe or somewhere. And I was surprised at the way Dr. Shaw did it. We didn't do much. We just got to control the bleeding and reapproximated it loosely. And Dr. Gregory, who was chief of orthopedics, came in and stabilized his fracture to his right radius in the ulnar area of the wrist. And in those days, this is no longer true, but it was just the principle or the rule that if a projectile went in the direction of a vessel, you explored the vessel. And there was a little bitty fragment of metal over in his left thigh. And Dr. Shires, and who else did that? Do you remember? You? You 3 guys? And it turned out the superficial femoral artery wasn't hurt, and so that was the end of that. And I'm going to tell a story now that you don't know. And I'm going to ask you, I've never heard this. It's interesting. I've never heard the things that he talked about. We didn't talk much about it, did we?
No, we never talked.
Yeah, well, I never have. This is the first time I ever said anything about it. And anyway, Dr. Giesecke was really a good guy. And he had a mean sense of humor. Old buddy could look at you just like a mannequin. And he could cut your knees out and you wouldn't know you were standing in midair for a while. And, you know, in those days, anesthesiologists had the strongest right hand in town because you sit there and bag them all day long, like this. Just like somebody running a dairy. Both of them do. And anyway, when Dr. Jenkins came down there, and Dr. Jenkins, I love that man. He was such a sweet man. And he said, I'll take the president. You take the governor. Of course, that's what he did. And the first time I could ever remember having a radio in the room was when we were operating on the governor. And we heard all the things, you know, the president had been pronounced dead, and then all the other events that followed. And we remember about the officer being shot over an oak cliff. But anyway, we knew all the stuff that was going on while we were doing that, and here's Buddy just sitting there, just the only thing moving was that right arm, you know. You know, nowadays, anesthesiologists do this, they look at all the dials. But anyway, he's sitting there bagging this thing, and Dr. Jenkins walked in the room. He looked up to, my patient's fine, how's yours? And he took off. Excuse me. Anyway, in those days we didn't have intensive care units. And so we kept the governor in the recovery room, and I just hung out with him, you know, from then on till sometime Sunday night. And we didn't have wall suction like we do now. And they had a little pump called a Gomco pump, and we hardly ever used anything other than just bottles to drain pneumothorax and that sort of thing. But that thing, it did rumble and leak a lot, because obviously there was a whole lot of trouble there. But when and then the Sunday morning was the first time that I ever left him. And I went upstairs to see it on the 7th floor to see our thoracic patients. About that time is when Oswald got shot. And this is one of the few statements I remember that was, well, shit, here we go again. and I ran downstairs, you know. That's the only thing I had to do with that was I was pumping blood in 4 different extremities, but it doesn't do much good when his blood is what he had before he got there and considering his injury. It's just not much you can do about it. And they, as he just said, Dr. Perry didn't ever talk about it, and most of us, I mean, as soon as we could, everybody got out of town. I went deer hunting. And killed a big deer, believe it or not, in Tampa. I didn't believe we would have a patient up there. That's a good place to go hide. And unfortunately, I got to know the governor pretty well. You know, he got well. I spent a couple of years in Afghanistan before, from 70 to 72, with a group running medical school, and he made an around-the-world tour for Dixie. And he came through there, and the embassy found out that I knew him, and he was interested in some of these old antique Khyber rifles, and I knew a little bit about that, and I spent a few hours with him then. But he was a marvelous human being that I really appreciate the opportunity to know, but hard way to get to know him. And I didn't, yeah, and I don't have any great conclusion, but I guess if you all want to ask some questions, you can ask Bob or me.
Let's take both, make sure both mics are, let's hear it for Dr. Duke, please.